welcome Croeso to this very special launch event for Take a Bite, the 2021 Rhys Davies Short Story Award Anthology. Thank you so much for joining us. Diolch yn fawr. I'm Elaine Canning. I'm Head of Special Projects at Swansea University and editor of this fantastic collection of short stories featuring the winners of the 2021 Rhys Davies Short Story Competition. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by guest judge Julia Bell, who is a writer and reader in creative writing at Birkbeck, and who'll be chairing this evening's session, along with 10 of our 11 finalists, and our overall winner for 2021, Naomi Paulus. Welcome, everybody. At this point, I'd like to say a special welcome to Susmita Bhattacharya, who isn't able to join us this evening to read from her fantastic story, unfortunately, because she is teaching. But I know she's in the audience briefly, and I wanted to say a warm welcome and thank you, Susmita. It's lovely that you're here with us for a very brief time. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. So you'll be hearing from all of our fantastic writers very soon. They'll be giving you a little bit of a taste, a flavour of their stories. But before that, I'd just like to let you know that there will be time for questions for our writers at the end of the session. So please do pop any that you may have into the Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. And please do pop them in there as we go along, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. Thank you. So we're launching this anthology this evening, thanks to a number of people and organisations. So special thanks to Parthian Books, our publisher, especially to Director Richard Davies and the brilliant Carly Holmes, who has been an absolute joy to work with. I know Carly is in the audience this evening. Thanks, Carly, for joining us. Special thanks also to the Rhys Davies Trust for all their support and for giving us the opportunity to relaunch this prestigious national short story competition. And of course, thanks to all of our finalists and to our winner and to our guest judge, Julia. So without further ado, Julia, I'll now hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Hello, and diolch yn fawr mawr for having me as your guest judge for this 2021 iteration of the Rhys Davies Prize. It's so lovely to have the finalists and the winner all bound together in this really beautiful book. I'm going to put it here again because it's so lovely. Parthian have produced a smasher. It's such a beautiful cover, and I can guarantee that the contents are fantastic. It was a really interesting process for me whittling down the pieces to the final 12 and then choosing a winner. And I suppose I used Rhys Davies's short stories as a model, largely because he's an amazingly overlooked writer. He's up there with Hemingway, I think, and Raymond Carver and some of the people that we would be really familiar with as masters or mistresses of the short story, Alice Munro, another one. And I felt very much that I wanted to choose pieces that perhaps were after his voice, seeing as the competition is named after him. And for me, the best stories have, in his work, have that deep sense of voice and often a really visceral twist or a surprise, a moment of revelation. And I'm thinking especially of stories like Night Town, or one of my personal favorites, which is The Dilemma of Catherine Fuchsias. Anybody who's read his work will know exactly what I mean about that story. They're really excellent examples of the short story form, little worlds which explode with colour, life and language, and then they linger in your mind afterwards and you can't stop thinking about them. This edition, which Parthian produced for Library of Wales, has got a selection of some of his best, but he wrote about 100 short stories in his lifetime. And I think this prize is a really lovely way to honour that legacy and to reintroduce his work to new readers. And certainly on the back of having judged this competition, I've now added one of his short stories to our reading list at Birkbeck. So I think that's also one of the points of a prize like this, is that we're able to pass on some of the great writing from the past to new generations. So I'd really urge anybody that hasn't engaged with any of his writing to just pick up a copy of that collection, because I think he's brilliant. So in this spirit, I picked stories which I felt had a completeness. They moved me, they created an experience. a moment of pause. What is art if it's not an experience? The writer is involved in making something which transmits meaning, feeling. So I was delighted, amused, surprised, moved, and all the feelings in between by the stories that I chose. And I hope that the readers will be too. In Silicon Valley, they often talk about something called friction, the thing which causes us distraction, stops us from engaging, creates a pause in the flow. In a short story, the friction is the absence of experience, the thing that stops me from wanting to read on, a kind of disengagement, if you like, a boredom. Then that's where the stories fail. So all of the pieces that are in this anthology and all of the writers that are here today wrote something that I felt really had something special, that spark that kept me going to the end of the piece. And then picking a winner felt like a very big responsibility. And I was extremely glad to have Elaine on call. So this is my big thanks to Elaine Canning for answering all my last minute queries, helping me to make the final choice, acting as a sounding board, really. It wasn't easy to do it on my own. I felt it was good to have somebody to bounce some of my thoughts off. So I really appreciated all the support that you gave me throughout that process, Elaine. And I want to say a big thank you to you for making this project happen. And in their own way, I think all the pieces are obviously winners. They're all really good pieces of writing. They're a pleasure to read. And to say that one is better than another is in a way to hold it to an impossible standard, because readers always have their different favorites. But for me, there was something about Naomi's story that really struck home, I think, for me particularly, and felt most attuned to the work of Rhys Davies, a sort of Welsh sensibility, perhaps Welsh sensibility of being Welsh in exile. The character making a different life from the one that she's grown up with out of necessity. And it felt close to the spirit of his work. And there's lots of delightful dialogue and a sense of an era being passed on that was really beautifully written. So, llongyfarchiadau mawr, Naomi. I think da iawn chi. And if there's any Welsh speakers in the audience, wedi colli llawer o geiriau ers I mi smyd yn Lloegr. So please don't ask me to embarrass myself by answering questions in Welsh, because I've forgotten all my vocabulary, is essentially what I just said in Welsh. I need to get back into Wales and remember how to have a conversation. So we've got a packed schedule for you this evening and a showcase of the stories that made it to the final list. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, again, about editing an anthology of work is that inevitably there are thematic connections between the pieces. It's one of the pleasures of a contest like this too, is that it gives us a chance to take the temperature of the moment and look at some of the common concerns. So unsurprisingly, after the year that we've just had, many of the stories were quite somber in a way, dealing with loss or the consequences of loss. So that was a theme that sort of wove its way all the way through the pieces. And I've kind of thought about it, and you'll read in the introduction that one of the ways in which the work is presented and edited is with that in mind. And the first story that we're going to hear from this evening is by Elizabeth Pratt, called James Enduring, which deals with the pandemic and the lockdown that we've just experienced and the loneliness of that and the weirdness of the time dislocation. I don't know about anybody else, but I feel very much like I've been asleep for 18 months and I've suddenly woken up and had to go back into the real world again in a very strange way. And I thought Elizabeth really captured that in this piece. So Elizabeth, I'm going to pass over to you for the first reading.
The things that made him awkward and weird in the before are normal now in the during. People talk about concealing their faces as if it bothers them. James was relieved to hear that he'd be openly wearing a mask. Staying in has become something even popular people do. He doesn't have to make excuses for not seeing anyone. He hesitates to call it a silver lining because that's when people react badly to him. He tries not to say anything about it at all. He's found on the inevitable work phone calls that it's acceptable to make low, non-committal noises like small sighs or groans, sounds that could mean anything and are interpreted into whatever the listener wants to hear. I'll miss my granddaughter's 3rd birthday, a coworker complains. James groans. His colleague says, I know, awful thing this. It saves a lot of needless talk. It's been 3 months, and James has been the happiest he can remember. No, not about all the things he sees on the news, not the crying nurses, the exhausted medical staff. the virtual and video funerals. Who would take delight in that? He has a compassion. He's not a psychopath. It's more the empty streets and return of birdsong, the blank blue sky and absence of contrails, the way that delivery people step far back from his door and call to him from the stairwell, unseen. Shopping online is preferable, of course. There's no pressure from bullying salespeople, and he doesn't miss fitting rooms with their thin curtains and contorting mirrors. He certainly doesn't wish to use a self-checkout ever again, but he's enjoying it, and that feels wrong. It's this. He finally has the time to do whatever he wants. He's watching TED Talks, learning 2 languages, cooking once he managed to get some groceries in. He's studying and reading more than he's managed in the last 4 years. He's happy. God damn it, he'll just say it. He's content. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I love that evocation of the lockdown. I felt very much, and I love the way that it changes from initially being a good thing to suddenly being pleased, will this stop? It's a very good story. Thank you. To sort of carry on this theme of loss, I think the other thing that 4 of the stories dealt with in a very sort of clear way was sort of family dynamics and the consequence of a loss, something that's happened in the past or in the near past. And then you see the characters kind of having to deal with it. The aftermath story, I suppose, is a way of thinking about it. And we had Craig Hawes's piece, Coat of Arms, was especially tender. I thought the descriptions, amusing descriptions of a day at a medieval reenactment were particularly poignant. We have Chloe Hugh with a castell, which is very familiar to me, the trip of children being taken on a trip to the castle in the school holidays. We did that a lot when I was young. And then in A Cloud of Starlings, we've got Philippa Holloway's piece, where there's something interesting about the way that the mother is trying to think about the loss of her daughter, not so much that she's gone, but she's a different person from perhaps what the mother would have wished. And then finally, Kate Lockwood Jefford's piece, Conditions for an Avalanche. We get a really visceral glimpse of life on the breadline and of people really, a really strong sense, I thought, of grief. So these 4 pieces are all clustered together, if you like, because they speak to each other in quite an interesting way. And we're going to start with Craig Hawes with an extract from Coat of Arms. Craig.
Thank you, Julie. Ellis had gone mad for all things medieval since Vincent Parry's phone call 3 weeks ago, and already I was yearning for the return of his dinosaur phase. First, there were the imaginary arrows shot at passing cars on the school run every morning. I say shot, Ellis was quick to inform me that the correct term was loosed. Then I discovered he'd been using my fishing rod as a lance, charging down the street on his BMX, and using the for sale sign in front of Mrs. Morgan's bungalow as target practice, so that it now looked as though it had been freckled with bullet holes. That boy of yours needs a firm hand, she'd said when I popped around to apologise. Granted, but he's been through a lot this year, I'd replied, at which she had knowingly nodded and offered her own apology. Another time, I'd walked into the garden one afternoon to find what appeared to be a wonky letter O the size of a bicycle wheel gouged into the beige-like perfection of the lawn. Ellis, I'd said, fighting to rein in my exasperation, is this some kind of weird flower bed? Because you really should have asked me first. No, Dad, it's a moat for my Lego castle. We'd ended up finishing the job together, working well into the evening with earth under our fingernails and grass stains on our knees as we filled it with water and, my idea, a floating armada of miniature plastic crocodiles. You do know they didn't have crocodiles in medieval Wales, right, Dad? He'd said. It's kind of unrealistic. With each misdemeanor, I chose to praise his creativity rather than scold him. Since Kirsten, his mother, my ex-wife, died a year ago, I've taken a laissez-faire approach to discipline. And in any case, Ellis is a sensitive kid, the kind where the waterworks come a little too easily and whom you worry about finding his groove in a cruel world. The time for tough love lay somewhere in the future. As for Vincent Parry, I'd been expecting him to get in touch for some time, wondered what was taking him so long. And then one Friday evening, after I'd bathed Ellis and put him to bed, he'd rung me.
Well, if that doesn't want to make you read on, I don't know what does. Thank you so much, Craig. That's great. And it's such a brilliant story. It made me kind of wince and laugh out loud in all the right kind of ways, I think. Next, we're going to take a trip to a castell with Chloe Hugh. Chloe.
Thank you. It took us ages to get there, and then could I find a parking space? So many bloody tourists. Kai needed the toilet again, and Oshan and Luke were really starting to get on my nerves, bickering over whose football team was the best. Then they saw the castle. It is impressive. I've been promising the boys we'd visit since, well, forever, but it was more than an hour along the coast, and they always had something on, drinking with his mates usually. You come through the town, only able to see the towers sticking up with the flags waving about. Then the road takes you past it. Walls loom up from the moat, walls so high, your eyes have to travel up to find the sky. Not that my eyes could, as I was still looking for a parking space at that point, but you get the picture. It's massive, Luke yelled in my ear as he leant forward in his seat. Put your belt back on, I snapped as I spotted someone with reverse lights on, about to exit their space. Whoa, Kai murmured. It's just a stupid lump of rock. Oshan folded his arms and looked the other way. Too old for fun now, eh, Osh? I glanced at him in the passenger seat as I pulled the car into the empty parking place. His arms were crossed and his brow furrowed. The eldest of my boys, at 12, he still had some softness of the boy about his face, but his body was for itself, growing so fast and so tall, just like his dad. I bought a ticket from the paying display. It was a bright but blustery day with a quick wind that tried to steal the ticket from my fingers. After dragging Kai into the public loo, 20p, we finally made our way up the mottled stone steps, underneath the portcullis and through the giant entrance. I handed over the money as I eyed Kai and Luke. They'd already squeezed past me into the great inner space beyond the entrance. They bounded onto the immaculate green grass, past the neat white sign that read, "Do not walk on the grass." Come on, Osh. I tugged my eldest's arm. Kai, Luke, I shouted, as I jogged to reach my two younger boys, who were scrambling over a low wall next to a sign that read, "Do not climb on the walls." This was a test for myself. I could do single parent. I could do family outings. I could do normal. I could do it on my own.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chloe. I have to ask you, which castle was it? I imagined Harlech because, I don't know, I did, but what, did you have one in mind?
I think I was thinking of Carnarvon.
Were you thinking of
If-
Carnarvon?
yeah,
Okay.
if any, yeah.
Thank you. I was going through all the castles in Wales when I was reading it and thinking about it. Thank you. Next up, we've got Philippa Holloway with her story, A Cloud of Starlings, another family drama.
Out the back, there is a large covered porch sheltered from the wind by glazed panels, a view across the fields and towards the coast. The nuclear power station hunkers half hidden behind tall conifers on the edge of the view. Sophie is there, the table where they eat summer suppers covered with newspaper sheets, 3 dead birds laid out in a row. She's wearing Perspex goggles from an old toy chemistry set, blue nitrile gloves and a plastic apron almost certainly taken from Sian's study or Dan's paramedic bag. She is holding a small paring knife, the sharpest knife in the house, and just as Sian steps onto the decking, makes a clean incision down the breast of the first bird. Sian bites her tongue, doesn't want to cry out or shout in case her daughter's hand, small and skinny inside those baggy blue gloves, slips and slices her own flesh open. She stands mesmerized as the child uses her thumbs to prise open the chest wall of the bird, muttering something under her breath. An incantation or self-reassurance, Sian can't quite tell. Either way, it raises the hair on her arms and makes her stomach fall to liquid. This is an unnatural juxtaposition of work and home, her daughter the fulcrum of the uncanny balance. Sophie pauses, peering inside the thorax, then checks the information on the iPad next to her. If Sian closes her eyes, takes in only the outline of her child in her head, she can imagine her daughter is painting or crafting something innocent or colourful out of Play-Doh or clay, can sink into the pastel-coloured memories of the expectation she carried along with the bump of her pregnancy. But when she opens them again, her daughter is pulling out the entrails of a dead starling. Sian watches as she begins removing organs, sealing them in small plastic food bags and weighing them on the digital kitchen scales, noting down the details in her sketchbook. She is fascinated by her child's apparent calm. This child who cried for a month when they hit a hare on the road to Abersoch one balmy summer's evening, who can't watch adverts appealing for animal charities or throw away a stuffed toy. This child who struggles to make friends, to make eye contact, to walk without tripping, is suddenly an elegant surgeon, half woman, precise. Jean shuffles onto the porch, letting her presence be known, bites back her instinct to gather the corpses into the newspaper and throw them out. Instead, she moves and sits opposite, waits for Sophie to speak. Are you mad at me? The gloved hands shaking slightly, the knife poised over the empty torso. No, baby, but what are you doing? An autopsy. Why? Because I need to know. Her eyes are wide behind the goggles, her shoulders tight. Will you help me? Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. It's such a moving relationship, that mother and daughter relationship. Great story, fantastic imagery all the way through. In fact, it was the first one I read, and I was like, wow, if they're all going to be as good as this, I'm going to have really big trouble trying to pick out what's going to be a winner. It's a really good story. Thank you very much, Philippa. Next up, we've got Kate Jefford, Kate Lockwood Jefford, and I have to confess that I know Kate from Birkbeck because she was one of my students many years ago. Well, not many years ago, not that long ago, a few years ago. But I would judge the competition entirely anonymously, so I had no idea who anybody was. And I did wonder when I was reading through some of them whether or not there were going to be a couple of people that I knew, because I knew some people that were going to enter. So I was pleased. I thought I have a hit rate here. This is a Birkbeck student getting a place. So yes, please read your lovely piece.
Thank you, Julia. All an avalanche requires is a mass of snow and a slope for it to slide down. She breathes in, she breathes out. She's been in her studio for the hours since he left. Warm fingers working cold, damp clay, the colour of toffee, softening, shaping, sculpting from the images in her head, images that refuse to fade. Now, in her kitchen, all she wants is to slip off her chair into a heap of herself. She presses hard on the soles of her slipper feet, these days always slipper feet, and sits and waits. Sits and waits. He gets back from his shift at 10:15. Any later, and her mind mangles itself around all manner of accidents waiting to happen in a warehouse. Towering structures teetering, toppling. It only takes a breeze, a knock, a nudge. Objects can dislodge, slip and slide and fall, suffocating, body crushing, skull splitting objects. She hopes he'd have his wits about him and run. She can't lose him too. She focuses on the wall ahead, on the acoustic guitar hanging there, tooth-white tuning keys, long, tapered mahogany neck, crisscrossed with strings and frets, the polished curves of its cedarwood waist and body, the bridge and pickguard she helped him paint gold. She hears the door, the blast of irate traffic, and he comes in bringing a whiff of diesel fumes and damp air, a plaster on his thumb, a blue plaster, the thumb on his left hand, his fretting hand. Cardboard cut, he says.
Thank you. I think that's so evocative for me about now, with all of the deliveries and the Amazon driving. And there was just something really bang up to date about some of the details all the way through that piece, Kate. Thank you. One of the other sort of clusters, I suppose, that emerged in the pieces that I chose was also this sense, and I think, again, this is a theme that's perhaps shared with some of the stories of Rhys Davies writes, about the way that we see each other. And the way that we perhaps make first impressions that are then changed as time goes on. And I think Jupiter Jones's story in Bird is a really interesting piece where there's a sort of strange encounter in the countryside where the man thinks that the boy is one thing and then realizes that he's something else. And I thought Rosle Manning's piece too, where the rugby playing Owen is revealed by the neighbour to be hiding some interesting secrets, also had a sort of sense of that too. And also Susmita Bhattacharya's The Truth is a Dangerous Landscape had the same kind of sense of secrets and lies within the family, but also the ways in which the characters see each other suddenly being exposed as the story progresses. I'm sorry that she can't be here to share that with us. But we're going to hear from, first of all, Jupiter Jones with the story Bird.
Thanks, Julia. Bowen had been disturbed in the night by the owls. Their haunting hoo hoo was a familiar lullaby, but their other noise always woke him. Keek, keek. This side of the forestry, one of them had caught something, and it was bragging, calling out, "Gotcha!" The owl would be holding the catch in its claws, bending over it, ripping off bits of fur and flesh, not savouring morsels, but indiscriminately swallowing sinew, intestines, bone, everything. It was too late in the year now to be feeding owlets. This was a banquet for one. Bowen slept fitfully and dreamt of his estranged wife. When morning eventually came, it was a dreary one. He watched the light beyond his uncurtained window gradually increase from green to grey and judged it to be approaching 6:30, but by the time he had his trousers on, it was almost 7 and the dog was waiting by his boots at the bottom of the stairs. "Hey, Fly, watcher," he said, and the tricoloured collie acknowledged his greeting with a slight twitch of her brow. He unbolted the back door and they stepped out into the dank but mild morning to sniff the air, and side by side they peed companionably behind the tangled hedgerow. Fly squatted, but there was a twitch of her left hind leg as if she almost thought she might cock it to make a tripod of herself. As Bowen fastened his trousers, he suppressed a smile. He could hear Maud was beginning to fret, plucking at her cage. Maybe the owls had woken her in the night too. She would have to wait. She'd been with him for 15 years now, much longer than Fly, and she was used to his ways. Today was not a good day, and he limped as he pottered about the kitchen, frying streaky bacon and bread for himself and getting kibble for Fly, and limped as he washed up, wiped and put away, and as he swept the floor. He rolled a cigarette and stood in the doorway with all his weight on his good leg and looked up the valley.
Thank you. Such an evocative description of Wales. The sound, you're very good at doing bird sounds as well, I have to say. That was a nice addition to the piece. But it was one of the things I loved about it was that just that sense of the landscape came across very strongly too. Thank you.
Welcome.
Next up, Rosle Manning with her piece. Hello, Rosie.
Hi, thanks, Julia. Dominic begins his crawl up towards his room. Lichen and clumps of moss crumble under his hands and knees. Above and to the right of him, from next door's upstairs window, something flashes. The sound of heavy bass starts up, the tinny melody muffled behind the glass. Another flash. A figure wearing gold is glinting and sparkling in the afternoon sunlight. They're dancing. Dominic flattens himself onto his stomach. Owen's an only child. Maybe it's his mum. He feels his cheeks redden, but stretches his neck a bit higher. The figure comes to the window, props a little mirror on the sill, and bends forward to look into it. Dominic frowns, a twist of recognition, those cheekbones. But his brain takes a moment to catch up. Owen. He looks different. His features are sharper, more defined. His eyes are wider, darker. His fluffy blonde hair is slick against his head. He's wearing a gold sequin top. Automatically, Dominic reaches for his phone and swipes to video. He zooms in. The window is far enough away that the picture turns grainy. He raises his hand, trying to keep it steady. Owen is rooting around in a small bag. He pulls out a pen and twists it, presses the pen to his top lip, and in one deft movement sweeps 2 scarlet arcs out from the centre and one across his bottom lip. Dominic can't pull his eyes away. He lies rigid against the roof. Owen picks up the mirror and steadies himself. As he lowers it, he glances up. Dominic whips his phone down. The movement catches Owen's eye. He leans forward and looks directly down at Dominic. They both freeze. Their eyes lock. Owen's breath misses the glass. Dominic's heart punches the roof tiles. Then Owen pulls the curtain in front of him, and the music abruptly stops. A blackbird, perching on the TV aerial, launches into song as Dominic scuttles up the roof to his room. Thanks.
Great, fantastic, thank you. What I loved about that piece particularly was the sort of sense of the contemporary moment and him watching this guy on his phone and videoing him, and just that, I thought, yeah, you've really brought the technology into the story, but made it feel absolutely bang on the sort of contemporary moment, this business of watching each other all the time and spying on people. It was all the way through the story. I thought it was very good. Thank you. The next two pieces that I'm going to introduce, and really, again, it was interesting. There's a sort of, I suppose, in the short story world, we tend to teach to this kind of North American realist tradition, which is that short stories are kind of realist moments, a bit like Raymond Carver. And I was really interested in these particular pieces, and Naomi Paulus is the winner as well, because they pushed beyond that a little bit. There was something interesting happening with language. Joshua Jones's Half Moon New Year just feels like a boozy night on the lash. There's a rhythm to the whole piece, and we're swaying around all over the page, and there's a sense of the language of that kind of experience is conjuring it for the reader. And then Brenig Davies's story, Dogs in a Storm, as well. There's a woman on the verge of some kind of transformation, and the sentences are fizzy. There's something interesting going on with the language, very deliberately trying to break down that kind of perhaps mirror realism, which we've all got very used to as perhaps the grammar of a short story. And I really appreciated that those stories did something a bit different. So first of all, we're going to hear from Joshua Jones with Half Moon New Year.
Thank you, Julia. Get off me. Get the fuck off me. He lies in a crumpled mess amongst shards of smashed glass and cigarette butts. Spilled booze drenches his skinny blue jeans, makes it look like he's pissed himself. Maybe he has. The pocket of his white shirt is ripped and hanging by a thread. He's holding his hands up in front of his badly beaten face, the hand-scuffed palms embedded with grit. His brow is bust open and the cheekbone plumbed, already beginning to swell. There's blood rushing the gap between nose and upper lip. The bottom lip is torn up bad too. His head is turned away towards the floor. He spits out a bubble of snot and blood, a subtractive mix of yellowish green and bloodstone red. The bubble bursts before it hits the ground. Danny Jenkins is pulled away from the boy on the floor by a mass of hands and screams, disembodied voices howling, "What the fuck? Get off him!" They sound far away, obscure. He stops trying to kick the boy and instead tries to find his feet on the alcohol-slicked floor. It was raining and had been all night, chattering on the roof over the beer garden. Weather doesn't stop the drinking. The girls in their skirts and makeup flirt with the boys, squeeze up to them for warmth and for a packet of crisps. The boys, in return, don't mind.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking us out for a drink. Brenig, you're next.
Thank you. Mary Ann sits on the bathroom floor, applying the hair dye. Sunset red. It looks absolutely ridiculous, and she absolutely loves it. She considered cracking open a bottle of Prosecco to glug over the sink while the stuff sank into her scalp, but decided against it. She feels drunk enough without it. And she genuinely does feel drunk. It must be the rain that's been battering down outside the window all afternoon. The slow drizzle, which gave way to lashings and spatterings and gallons, full gallons of water being spat from the sky. She sees it fall and thinks, good, good, let's have a bloody flood. Let's have a big, Noah flood, and flush away all the shit we have to pretend to like and think and feel, and leave only the other stuff. She doesn't question exactly what she thinks will be left, but she knows she wants to be someone else. She wants the storm to come, to flay her skin from her bones, to swallow her up, gobble her. She wants the storm to pick her up in its big, strong King Kong grasp and fling her around. She wants to fall to the ground and be Marianne in Paris in a pantsuit.
That's fantastic. You've got such a lovely lyrical way of writing, Brennig. I'm really looking forward to whatever you're going to do next. It's going to be brilliant. Thank you.
Right.
So to our winner, Naomi Paulus. This was just, the minute I read this, I fell in love with it. I just thought it was such a lovely piece of writing. I'm so happy that you're here to share it with us. So I'm going to ask you just to read a little extract and then we'll have a quick chat about it.
Yep, I can do. Thank you. Okay. Back door opened again and the two middle sisters, Helen and Wendy, came in chatting and let the cat in with them. They were both carrying deep pudding bowls wrapped in cling film, and Rhian wondered how they'd fitted through the narrow door frame, seemingly still side by side. Irish twins they were. Well, Welsh twins. Born 9 months apart in the same school year, and even though they were 60, it still mattered. They took off their tall, dark hats and placed them on the kitchen table, then got to work. Where's Mum? Yes. Any cake here? Upstairs, bathed, dressed and ready. Barrabrief in the tin. I'm putting my trifle in the fridge. Jove, the bus was slow. Fresh strawberries from the market in it, mind. Well, it was going to happen one day. That'll be nice. I can't believe it. Where's this? With 4 of the 5 sisters in the same room, the conversation got harder to follow. Rhian pondered the mathematical conundrum. If there were 4 of her in, how many different conversations we had at once? Well, there was Mum and Esselt, there was Mum and Helen, Mum and Wendy, then there was Esselt and Helen, Esselt and Wendy, and finally Helen and Wendy. So that was 6 in total, not including Rhian. However, there was no reason to assume that Esselt was having the same conversation with Helen, and thought that she was having with Esselt. The relationship between the conversations was not necessarily reciprocal, and that brought the total to 12. Although deafening, Rhian found the noise soothing. It rested just above the flapping tea towels, filling the air like a fine Welsh mist, drenching everything and drowning out her own thoughts. Occasionally, one voice would shrill above the rest, amplified further when it bounced off the thick stone walls of their cottage. It was the reason Rhian's father had slipped out earlier and was sitting outside in the cold. He had previously suggested women in the family he married into were descended from banshees, the Huraith, because of the pitches they could reach. Comparing middle-aged women to decrepit, wailing harbingers was not particularly imaginative.
Thank you. Congratulations. It's such a lovely piece and it's such a great way to sort of frame the anthology. It gives us a lovely title. It's a fantastic opening. Yeah, it's great. I hope you're really pleased. And I wanted to sort of ask you a little bit whether you knew anything of the work of Rhys Davies before you wrote this, or whether this is your style.
I think that's a good question. I actually didn't. I saw the competition and I read about Rhys Davies because of it, and I thought he sounds really interesting. I haven't actually heard of him. I bought the book you said earlier, and I started reading this, and I thought I didn't feel like I'd ever read anything like it. The story went about him, and they didn't even necessarily seem about people he knew, but they seemed to capture some kind of cultural universality that is completely intangible. Once you read it, I thought, these stories are my family. These could be stories that my grandmother told me. I felt this connection to them that was so real, but I didn't know where it came from. So I was then really kind of inspired by that to then write this story. it did kind of come directly from reading these. Yeah.
That's great, because I think that one of the things that the legacy of colonialism, etc., people think it doesn't apply to Wales. It applies to Wales just as much as it applies to anywhere else that was colonised. And it seems to me that these stories, some of the Anglo-Welsh writers, they're so good. Some of them are they're as good as their English contemporaries. They're as good as the American contemporaries. And some of the work that Rhys Davies did, particularly in the collection that Parthian's put together, are really up there as classical pieces of literature. And I think that that's sort of Anglo-Welsh as well, which I have a very strong connection with, because obviously I live in London, but I was brought up in Wales. I can speak Welsh. So similarly, I felt that there was an investigation in your work into that position. You're somebody that's come from there but not living there. The character was anyway. That was the thing that I really also related to. Was that something you were thinking about when you were writing it?
Yes, because I think the whole reason I came across it is much last year, I don't know if anyone, but we're all told to work from home, and the thought of being in a flat in London for any extended period of time filled me with horror. So I immediately moved back down to Swansea and ended up being there till about 2 weeks ago. So I was there for 18 months. And so the only reason I think I found out about the prize was because it was being where I grew up, and actually being as an adult living in Wales for the first time since I was 18 and I left university, and kind of rediscovering my relationship to the place. I was an 18-year-old, where all 18-year-olds want to leave where they're from and kind of make their way in the world, and actually coming back and being like, I actually really like it here. This is great. What and rediscovering, being re-immersed in my family, and everything that came with. So I actually found out about it because I trying to get more involved in Swansea, like following things on Twitter and following like that. So that's how I found out about the competition. So I was in that kind of, I guess, base that then really in the story, she's come home and she's immersed in her family environment, and she's trying to like figure out how she fits into like in that culture, and like, but what does it mean for the new generation? And so I was very much thinking about those things for the past 18 months, because I was in a similar situation.
Yeah, I think you did that very well. I think what I like about it is it's a story and a meditation. It works on very many different levels. And I felt the dialogue was really truthful. So this is something you've taken from your family. I'm presuming that you've sat down and listened to people speaking in this way.
Yeah, I think it really started in the dialogue for me. That's where I started writing it. I mean, my grandmother was the youngest of 14. She had sisters. And I grew up thinking it was normal to be listening to what someone's saying, but there's 10 different conversations going on once. You're listening over here because they might say something interesting, and you're saying it, and what I like is the conversation is so direct, and it can come across as like maybe it's rude. You know, I had a boyfriend at university complain that I wasn't saying thank you to him all the time because I wasn't polite. But why would I be polite to you? If we're gonna have a close relationship, that's not how I see them as working. But it come across as rude because it's people interrupting each other. They don't look like they're listening to each other. They're talking over each other. But it's that kind of closeness, and it actually comes to, love, and you're supported, and you can be direct and you can say whatever you want. And I wanted that to come across slowly through the different parts of the conversation, that they are really listening to each other, even though it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, I love that bit you just read about the mathematics of the conversation. I thought that was a really genius bit of writing.
There is also a famous incident with a coffee cake made by my grandmother was terrified of being stuck in the bath for 3 days. Apparently it happened to one of her friends. So those are actually true things that happened. Yeah,
I could sense that too. Well, just finally, before I pass over to Elaine again, in case anybody's got some questions in the audience, I'd like to know where this sits. I know that you haven't written that much. I think this is perhaps a new venture for you, writing fiction.
It is. I'm coming to relatively get, thanks to something that happened last March. I had a lot of time on my hands last year, and I thought I'd start to try to write things down. And I think that what winning this competition is going to do for me is going to give me confidence to say, well, maybe you could write some more, and maybe you could dedicate some more time to this. And yeah, we'll just give confidence to do more, and also actually tell people now that I've started writing things, so that I can show people and I can get more feedback, and I can just have, you know, more support in it. So yeah, I really, really appreciate it.
Good. I hope you carry on, and we see many more things from you in the future. Thank you so much, Naomi. And thank you to all of you. I absolutely loved all of the stories, and I hope that you enjoy reading each other's pieces too. I hope you've enjoyed reading the collection, because I think they're all absolutely A1 fantastic pieces of work. So I'm going to pass back to Elaine for the questions. Hello, Elaine.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks, everybody. Absolutely fantastic readings. It's so lovely after reading your words to hear your voices. Absolutely magical. We're still waiting on some questions coming in from the audience at the moment, but if it's okay, I have a question which I'd like to throw out to the group. It was really interesting what Naomi was saying in terms of when she wrote this story, you know, starting last March. And Elizabeth, we started off with you, with James enduring, and, you know, which obviously reflects the pandemic and the lockdown that we've been through. So I had a question for you, Elizabeth, but then one to open up to everybody. Elizabeth, at what point during the lockdown did you write this story? And for everybody else, I was really intrigued that in some cases you were writing about loss and family dynamics, the natural environment, but in your case, Josh, you know, you're in the pub, the things that we used to do and we weren't able to do for a while. So my question is, when did you write these stories? Are these stories that you've developed over a while, or are these stories that you wrote during the lockdown period? So Elizabeth, maybe if we start with you.
Yeah, I think it was the first major lockdown, I think probably March. And then I sort of worked on it over the next few months as things started getting, and I think everyone will understand what I mean, started getting really very strange indeed. And you started missing things that you didn't realize were part of your life, and not missing things that you assumed you would. And I was caught up in that. So I was working on the story as I was kind of going through it myself. And a lot of it is really, I feel like I cheated because I was writing down a lot of what I was thinking and feeling at the time. So, and just putting it behind this character, just the strangeness of it. So it took a few months, but it was in between the first two lockdowns, I think. Yeah.
Really interesting. Would anyone else like to pick that one up? Josh?
Yeah, this was, my story was written in lockdown as well. While I was doing my master's in creative writing, and having to kind of create a 40,000 word manuscript in a very short amount of time, which actually just kind of pushed me to like open the floodgates. And in the space of a few weeks, I kind of wrote about 20 stories, which
Wow.
I've worked on, you know, as much as possible as I can since then. And it was just such an amazing experience to write that much after, you know, so much time in lockdown. And then before that, and before the course, I was struggling to create anything. And it just opened the floodgates. And this is one of the stories that I wrote. And almost all of it is based on true experiences of witnessing fights and toxic masculinity within a bar, or within that environment. And as many people here, you know, sort of growing up, going to, you know, rugby clubs, getting into local town pubs underage just because they know your family members. Or
Yeah, thank you for that, Josh. Anyone else? Kate?
Yeah, I could say something. Excuse me. I actually started writing this story before lockdown, and a bit like what Josh was saying, it sort of like all my work, I think it draws on kind of real things and real concerns, and then I kind of fictionalize them. But I think what lockdown provided me with was a real kind of no excuses. I mean, you can always find distractions, I know, but I think it really helped me to kind of consolidate a proper writing routine. And I also discovered within that that I'm not very, it doesn't work for me to write one story. I'm actually better to write a story, get it to a point, think, God, I'm sick of that, put it aside, think about it, but actually be working on something else. So that I can see people not, and it's probably kind of, but sometimes it takes you a while to have the space to discover what works and what doesn't work. So I suppose this is one of a group of stories that just feels, and it feels like they've done better than previous stories that I've written. And when I say they, I'm talking about maybe 3 or 4 that have been shortlisted or got, but that feels, that feels very satisfying. And I think a bit like the character in the lockdown, yes, in Elizabeth's story about, I actually was really enjoying lockdown. I mean, I know that's a bit glib because it's too simplistic, but I actually, aspects of it were really good for me. Aspects of it clearly weren't as well. And I mean, I can get apoplectic if I think about this government, but that's for another day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, Kate, because what you were saying about the writing routine and finding that during lockdown, because from listening to people speak, I've heard, and certainly from my own experience, very different experiences where some people struggle to write or struggle to find that way, and others were able to find a routine that they hadn't had before. So it's really interesting in terms of the way we work, and that you need to be working at different pieces and other people need to focus on one. Really interesting. Brennick, do you mind if I come to you? Where did Marianne come from? Marianne, where did she come from?
I started writing the story on a family holiday in Florida, and obviously they have like very big storms, like proper storms, and the comment about dogs sensing when a storm is coming is something that my mum always said. And when a storm was coming on, I think it was the 4th of July weekend, I could really feel it and I wanted to kind of capture it. But I write longhand as well and then type it up after when I'm editing. So I kind of left it for a long time then and came back to it during the first lockdown. So I think a lot of the kind of frustrations and wanting to escape and do something different of that maybe I was feeling in the first lockdown definitely found their way into Marianne, I think.
Yeah, I wondered where the storm came from. I wondered what the influence was for the storm. But when I think about it, when you talk about Florida, yeah, absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Jupiter, could we go to you? You take us into the natural world, into natural environment. Is your story one which was written during the lockdown period?
Yes, it was, but the timing of it wasn't significant. What it was really based on was place. I know it's a very character-led story, but the thing that mattered to me was the place. And last summer, my son bought a very dilapidated old house with a couple of acres of land up in a valley. It's the back of beyond, it really is. And the old guy who had lived there before was quite a recluse. He was quite an oddball. He kept birds of prey. I've never met him, but him and his world fascinated me, of how he lived. It was quite primitive.
Yeah, and well, I mean, I know your story, yes, is character driven, but that sense of place is so beautifully delineated. It's absolutely gorgeous. We have one question which has come in.
Three,
we've
actually,
over
I can
3
see.
now, yeah.
Yeah.
We've got one from Elisa Jenkins. What one piece of advice would you give to someone who wants to write a short story? Chloe, Josh, you go ahead. Do you want to take that one?
Sorry, I immediately wanted to say that the most important thing about writing is community. I was lucky to have a number of people that I could, just throw whatever I was writing at, and they would edit and critique very heavily, because we had enough trust in each other that we could take whatever criticism that we may have and not, take it personally. So yeah, writing can't and shouldn't be written in a vacuum.
Totally, absolutely agree with you. I think that's one, and Ailsa, who asked the question, is just about to join the Birkbeck MA. Hello, Ailsa. I think that's one of the things we try very hard to establish on the MA course, as a sense of community, because it's the readers reading for each other and looking at each other's work and critiquing it is the most important thing as part of the whole process, because having a reader helps you to improve what you've written. So yeah, doing an MA, I think, Ailsa, would be my answer.
Definitely. Definitely being part of the community, as you say, Josh, is so important. Chloe, what piece of advice would you give? Sorry, Naomi, yeah.
I was just going to say, can I ask a question? Which is, how do you think you become part of a community like that? As someone who hasn't done a master's or hasn't involved in a kind of literature writing scene, asking for myself, how would I get involved in that?
You kind of just have by winning this prize. I think in a way you've kind of set yourself into a network of people who, I'm sure some of you already know each other or know of each other or are familiar with some of each other's work. And I would suggest an MA is a way of doing it, or finding a writing group, some friends that are similarly interested in reading and writing, and they can look at your stuff and give you feedback that's more than just, oh yeah, that was nice. They can look at it and say, well, yeah, it would be amazing if you did this, and then you start to internalize that, which is the other thing, is that you start to know when you're making your own mistakes, or you're doing a sort of familiar thing of being lazy or not quite finishing something. It becomes easier, I think. My experience of the MA is that students often stay friends with each other for life, actually, after the course. So there'll be a couple of people that you'll still share work with. I know Kate's nodding. I know that's true for Birkbeck students.
Yeah, and there's some really good advice coming in the chat as well, Naomi, asking are you on social media,
group,
talking about local writing groups. Yeah, lots of good advice in there as well. Thanks, everyone. I was just going to bring in Chloe, and I'd like to bring in Craig and Rosie and Philippa, who haven't had a chance. So perhaps in the last few minutes, if we can direct the last few questions to you. So Chloe, what piece of advice would you give to someone starting to write a short story?
I think for me, I teach A-level as well as write myself. And one of the pieces of advice I give those students is just make it about something that changes. So you've just got one significant change. Because I think often my students, they try to put too much in. So they write a little novel. They've got like a kind of synopsis for a novel rather than a short story. And I think it's about really simplifying it and just getting to the core of what your protagonist is thinking or feeling or doing in that moment, and taking them on that moment of change, whether it's an emotional change or a physical change, and just encapsulating that so that you've got your kind of you've got your time and your structure around that moment of change. I think that's probably what I would say.
Thanks, Chloe. We've got another question here about the word limit for the competition, the upper word limit, and so the question is about how you approach the word limit, the longer length, and had you written short stories that length before, and was it a challenge? Philippa, would you like to take that one?
Yeah. I don't know whether I'm lucky or unlucky, but a lot of my short stories naturally fall at about 4,500 to 6,000 words. I say lucky because for amazing competitions like this, it means that I'm hitting that mark, and the story has space to have its own structure without me trying to cut it too short or stretch it out in a way that isn't going to work, that is just full of padding. Each story kind of has its own spatial needs, and so I think I'm quite lucky that quite often the stories that I write fall in that category. I'm unlucky because so many competitions and submission windows only want 1,000 words or 1,500 words, and I find that actually more difficult. But for me, 5,000 words is the perfect amount to take that moment that Chloe was just talking about, to find some incident, some interaction between people, some aspect of life that you want to investigate, and pick it apart and explore it in just enough detail to make it sing, but not to make it too loose or too big. So yeah, for me this is perfect. But I can understand everybody has their own sort of ways of working, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely, they do. Craig, is it the same for you? Are you used to writing that length of story?
Yeah, I think like Philippa, a lot of my stories that I write naturally come between sort of 3,000 and 4,000 words anyway. But I mean, my background is in journalism rather than creative writing, so I'm used to writing to deadlines, you know, really, really strict ones. I have found though in the past that you can sort of overshoot the runway sometimes and write, you know, you aim for 3,000 or 4,000 words or whatever the criteria states, you know, of the competition. But then if you have a longer story, there's always other competitions you can enter it in. You know, there's all kinds of competitions with varying word lengths, anything from sort of 2,000 words to 6,000-7,000 words. So you can always find somewhere for your story, no matter the length.
Okay, thank you. And Rosie, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still sort of all quite new to this. I've only been writing the last couple of years, so I'm still sort of finding my way. But the form of the short story really appeals to me. And I was actually going to go back to that previous question about what advice would you give? I read short stories because they are infinitely variable, and you think you've got a handle on it, and then someone will go and do something completely blow your mind with what they've done in such a short sort of word count. So yeah, I mean, I always remember my A-level English teacher telling me off for being too concise. So she kept saying, you know, spread it out a bit, make it, you know, make a paragraph out of this sentence. But to me, if you can get away with encapsulating a point in as fewer words as possible, you get all the more power into that. And, you know, so I really, really enjoy the challenge of that. So I'm sort of working on a novel at the moment, and for me, it's far harder to try and, you know, eke it out and explore it, where I really just want to, you know, get it all down in a short thing. So, and there's always that thing of short stories being like glimpses into worlds. You don't have to explain everything. You know, the reader, you know, you need to give a lot of credit to your reader, and they can pick up on things, you know, with just the merest of hints. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting medium to get into, really. And you never get bored of it, ever.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We've got one final question. I'm conscious that we are just running out of time, but I'll throw this out to whoever wants to pick this up. It's about your writing routines during lockdown. What were your writing routines like during lockdown, and how did lockdown help you? Did you find it easier to write during lockdown? Would anyone like to take that one to finish us off? Rosie.
I actually found it really hard. And it's funny because, you know, you think of if you write, you spend a lot of time on your own anyway, you have to. But it didn't flow for me. I think I was missing, I mean, apart from all the awfulness in the news as well, which, you know, is crashing in on you, I just missed, you know, being around sort of people. I'm not very sociable, but just even if you're not part of something, just watching people and picking up on the way people are behaving, and to have that all completely gone was really, you know, it did impact my writing a lot more than I thought it would. And I think it played into the story that I wrote, because we found that we were interacting so much more over screen, and it's, you know, we spend a lot of time on screens anyway, but it's really pushing us down into that sort of, that, you know, formulating your ideas and things about people through a screen and through what they're showing you, and it doesn't even scratch the surface of what people actually are. So yeah, I found it very difficult. Yeah.
Philippa.
Yeah, I agree, Rosie. I I wrote quite a lot just before lockdown, but during lockdown itself, I found that, like you say, that stimulus had gone, and there was so much to process in terms of what the lockdown was. And I actually turned away from writing myself to working with other writers, and I worked with writers all over the world and edited a collection of their writing about lockdown, because that way I was learning about lockdown through these sort of global responses, finding out how other people were handling it and interpreting it as a sort of a literary documentation of what was happening really as it was happening. And I found that working with other writers gave me that sense of connection. So I was having conversations with people all over the world and talking about their work and pulling together other people's work. And that really bridged the gap for me. And as well, it meant that I was able to read so many different kinds of writing from people all over the world and learn so much more about writing myself. So now I'm in a position where I am able to start thinking about my own writing again. And I've done lots of editing of old work, but I'm just starting to sort of write again. And I feel like that richness of experience of working with other writers has been the most amazing use of my time. I was starting to feel quite bad that I wasn't producing as much as I'd like to, but I actually feel that was perfect for my writing process, and I'm really grateful to have had that opportunity. But yeah, Rosie, that lack of being able to watch what's going on and that kind of stimulus, I found it quite hard.
Yeah, and I guess that gave you the community that Josh talked about, by engaging that project, it gave you a way to build a community around you.
It was about bringing people together at a time when we were told we weren't allowed to be together, and in the end, it brought people together from all over the world, and that was absolutely blew my mind. It was amazing. But yeah, this kind of community is so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth, did you want to come in for a final word?
I was just going to say, I think I was writing more during lockdown, but I couldn't read. I couldn't focus enough to read, and I certainly didn't want to read anything that I didn't know the ending to. It was the unpredictability of I didn't want to pick up novels and read them because I got nervous about how it would end. So I started reading books that I had read years and years ago just because they were comfortable. But my own writing, because I couldn't read or I couldn't focus long enough to get into anything, because I absolutely agree you should read. If you want to write, you should read, and I couldn't, and it was really scared me. I thought, what if I can never read again? I just couldn't focus. So I started writing instead as a way to get out of it and as a way to rebuild a daily ritual. I think that was hugely important, to say, look, at 9 o'clock or whatever, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to sit down and have an hour of just writing. And that's it. I have to do that because that is my new routine. It really helped to have something to hang on to anchor you in some sort of normalcy. People say that, but it's true.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Yeah, I think we've all, it's very apparent that we've all got different coping mechanisms, over the past 18 months, and we've dealt with writing and reading in very different ways. I think we could continue this conversation for a much longer time, and I would love to, but unfortunately we are out of time. We are over time, so I apologize to our audience for being a little bit over, but I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of you for sharing your work with us, to Julia for judging and for chairing this evening so beautifully, to all of you for joining us tonight, for watching and for engaging with us. We do have a little feedback form. If you have a few moments that you could take to fill that in for us, that would be fantastic. Thank you. And if you would like to buy this lovely book with these beautiful stories within it, the details of how you can do so are in the chat as well. So once again, thank you so much, everybody. Thanks to everybody who joined us tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you. Bye, everyone.